Good morning, sir.
Good morning. I don't know how this has happened, but 2 meetings got created.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was thinking that that one would be the one I put here. And I found that nobody was coming, so I tried this link. I don't know how this got created. Is this the only link you people got?
Yes, sir. Yesterday, what happened is there came September 4 for yesterday's class. So I think that was.
No, yesterday it didn't show.
No, it showed me as September 4. But since you started the meeting as a host, it got started, I guess.
Yeah, no, I had to start it from the AVR group. I had to go there. I couldn't start it. I don't know what I'm doing. Slightly off my rocker, it seems. Now, in addition to this pain, I have several other things to do. All stupid things I've been involved in, and I don't have the option to say no thank you to those. And I have to record lectures and put them on academia.edu, and that is a very, very rigorous process because they want all kinds of things. The lighting should be like this, the background should be like this, the slides should be like this. So it's a typical American thing. They look at all things except the content. The content of the speech, that is the least important. Everything else is important. So that is not getting done, and I don't know. Why isn't anybody here?
I think some of them are going to college for today. They were discussing in the group.
I went there, nobody was there.
Okay.
Sir, you said at 11 o'clock, no? I think many people come and
No, I again put a message in the group. Class started, join.
No, because I got delayed in, I mean, I'm saying delayed. I went to the college. There was nobody there, and I came here. I signed and came. There was nobody there. And how many day scholars are there anyway?
Don't know, sir. Maybe around 5.
Okay. All right, so let's, 3 is good enough.
Yes, sir. We'll start and we'll finish off with Mill.
Yes. Okay, so we were doing utilitarianism till yesterday. Today, let's start with John Stuart Mill, and there are many disputations about who or what Mill was. Some claim that he is utilitarian, while others claim that he was a classical liberal philosopher, while certain others claim that he is a utilitarian who turned into a classical liberal philosopher. Some claim that he was also a some claim that he was also a, what should I say? Yeah, he was also a political economist, while some others say that he abandoned political economy when he turned against economic liberalism. The general belief about him is that he is an individualist who championed the cause of the liberty of the individual, some defy this to argue that there is a strong and inflexible class-based component which makes him an anti-individualist. I have to put this also in inverted. And some others argue that his idea of liberty is something that is applicable to the rich and the affluent, while the poor are denied of liberty. So Mill's individualism is not universal, but restricted only to a few. Some see him as a revolutionary philosopher with absolutely new ideas, and this is also contested by many who believe that there is shut up. Who believe that there is I'm going to hit you. So I put out the schema that we will be dealing with so that we don't go meandering like we did yesterday with Jeremy Bentham. I have to keep this this short class short. I went into a great deal of pain later on yesterday, and I've been told that I shouldn't sit for long durations, and I've been asked not to take 2 classes in a day. In fact, my neurosurgeon had advised that I take at least a week off. And when I asked him yesterday about the increase in the pain, he told me that you should not be teaching at all, even if it is sitting or standing. But I have to finish the syllabus, and so we'll have to do it in this unfortunate way of pure exam orientedness. But otherwise, I would love to do Mill. I would stop it. Stop it. I would love to have taken about 6 to 7 or even maybe 10 classes, because all these things that you see, these are all, what should I say? All these contradictions that you see make Mill a delightful philosopher to teach. because it is yeah, that is what I'm trying to do, finish in an hour. So I would be delighted to teach at great length, but unfortunately, it's not happening. I told you that I love teaching Rousseau. And when I looked into the analytics of my YouTube lectures, the ones that all these that I'm posting, you won't believe it. I have got 4 times the viewing and listening of my lectures on Rousseau compared to the other people that I have taught. 4 times. 4 times the views and the listening time. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Anyway, so I would have liked to have taught Mill like that, but it's not going to happen. There are 2 other things that I need to include here before I start off with looking at things. Some people call him a liberal socialist. This should again be in inverted commas. And other people call him a constitutionalist. And he is also credited with the creation of the phrase tyranny of the majority, while others say, oh God, while others say that he copied the coinage of Alexei the Tocqueville, the French, I wouldn't call him a philosopher, the French aristocratic writer who went to America to save himself from the, what should we say, the tyranny that followed, the tyranny of the Jacobin, as it is pronounced in French, but it is Jacobins, Jacobins. So there were these two factions, the Jacobins and the Girondins. Girondins are Gerondins. But it was Robespierre who led the Jacobin terror, and to escape that, Tocqueville went to America, and he thought that they also had a freedom in 1776, a few years before France, and after France attained freedom from monarchy with the French Revolution. It basically led to this reign of terror, and whereas America also had a revolution which was quite peaceful. They did fight a war which didn't last very long because the king did have money to pay the soldiers to fight the war. So, and after that, they set up a democracy which worked very well. That's what Alexis de Tocqueville argued. He said that in France, there was the tyranny of the majority, whereas in America, there was no tyranny of the majority, but I'll come to that at the end of the lecture. Yeah, so like I said, there are many disputations, many claims about who he is or who he was. Even today, I mean, none of these disputations have been solved. There are different professors of philosophy who publish profusely, and all of them are still fighting these battles that I have, the battle lines that I have drawn here. So even today, there is no one accepted interpretation of who Mill was or what his philosophy is. So that makes it exciting to teach him. And you need to have a lot of self-confidence if you're going to take a side in all these, because you see, these are all, most of them are binaries. So if you are going to not just describe that, you know, X says this, Y says that, and leave it, that's one thing. But if you really teach Mill properly, and even in this truncated atmosphere, I intend to do that. I'll take sides. So you need to have a lot of confidence to take a side among all these claims. Okay, so let's start with his life. He was a very, very intelligent child. he was quick to learn. The word that people usually use on him is precocious, P-R-O-C-O-C-I-U-S. He is considered to be a very, very precocious child, very quick to learn. And he learned the Greek language at the age of 3. So that should tell you how precocious he is, because Greek is a very, very difficult language to master. At 3, he didn't master it, but he knew enough of it to read the classics in Greek. His father, James Mill, who probably pioneered home schooling, which is a big thing now in the United States of America, where people don't send their children to schools. They school them at home. Okay, and when the time comes, they have to go take the requisite examination, pass that. And I think we are having a system like that in Telangana. I think it's called the open school system. The open school system is like the open university. There are no classes, there are nothing. So you can be schooled anywhere. You can also be schooled at home. So mothers who are well educated and want their children to learn can opt for open schools, open schooling, which is nothing but a part of which can be, or you send people to tuitions. That is the only other thing you can do. But you can school your children at home. So that is a trend that is catching on. It's a very big thing in America, and it's going to be probably catching on in India, but I have my doubts about how successful it'll be, but let's not waste time about that. So he was schooled at home by his own father. And in those days, it was all about, sorry, the whole idea about education was basically learning the classical languages. And that is the reason why schools in England initially came to be called grammar schools. Even the grammar school that we have here in Hyderabad, it's an ancient school. I mean, ancient as in it was set up somewhere in the 1850s, I think, or even before. And it was set up by the Anglican Church. So they have a St. George's Church right next to that school. And the St. George's Church, I mean, because of the St. George's Church, the school came to be called the St. George's Grammar School. So learning was essentially about grammar of Latin, Greek, which are the classical languages, and later on about Old English, medieval English, and things like that. So they were language-based, mainly language-based. The whole idea of economy and all these things, they came in with the modern period, and mathematics was also taught in schools, even though they were focusing on language education. Mathematics was a discipline that was taught, as was from the 19th century onwards. Even sciences were taught in some schools, thanks to positivism and Auguste Comte. So we'll have occasion to talk about the relationship that John Stuart Mill had with Auguste Comte. Auguste Comte was a very big influence on Mill. We'll come to that. So is he a utilitarian? That is the question. Now, some will say that it all depends on what you're reading. If you're reading only his work on liberty, which he himself calls an essay, but it is actually an essay which is the size of a pretty big book. So if you concentrate only on this particular work of his, because that is the most well-known, and that is the one that is, what should I say, that is concerned with society and all that. So that is the most read book. And those who read that book will say he's a classical philosopher. They will say he is an individualist. They will argue that there is a political economy in him. So they will say all these things if they read only on liberty. But if you read his other works, there are many of his. Subjugation of women, for instance, which many consider the first feminist book. Okay, the subjugation of women is the first feminist book according to a number of people, and I subscribe to that. There have been many women who fought for women's rights, political rights, and all that, but nobody wrote a book. Certainly not Mary Wollstonecraft. She didn't write. She is credited to be the first writer, first person who fought for women's rights towards the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. So, but she didn't write anything. She only said the rights that are given to men should be given to women. Okay, so that is the kind of thing you see. There were a few women who were really scattered, and they mainly asked for equality of treatment with men by asking for political rights. That's about it. And it happened mainly in America. Europe, much more traditional society, because it's Europe is, like I told you once, it's called the old world, as against new world of the Americans. As against that, that is called the old world. And in the old world, the attitudes of conservatism are still prevalent, even in the 21st century. So in the 19th century, John Stuart Mill didn't only say franchise for women. He talked about how women are subjugated at different levels. So if you look at that, then he's a revolutionary philosopher. He's an absolutely revolutionary philosopher. Okay. And political economist, very definitely, he started off. That is what is the utilitarian phase, actually, even though it is the classical liberals who claim that as proof of his classical liberal philosophy. It can be, and I'll come to that in a minute as to why it can be. But it was a utilitarian thing because he believed that pleasures that Bentham talked about, and I wish Mr. Akshay was here today because he was raising some points about wealth yesterday. I thought I'll answer those when we come to Mill, but he's not here. Too bad. So he, while agreeing with some of the ideas of utilitarianism, he disagreed on some grounds, but he considered himself a utilitarian. Sorry. And that is because of the fact that he was what he saw was that the pleasures that Bentham talked about were pleasures which demanded a certain kind of wealth or a certain amount of wealth. He believed that if utility is categorized as the furtherance of pleasure, he believed that you needed to have some kind of wealth at your disposal for the furtherance of your pleasures. And it is for that reason that he was an ardent supporter of taxation. The classical liberalism is anti-taxation. Please remember this. That is how you can argue that he's utilitarian. Okay? Because classical liberalism will say, if you have wealth, it is you who are more rational. So if the others are less rational, too bad. That's all it says. Right? And that might have been okay in the time of Locke, when a new society was coming into being, but it was not okay in the 19th century, which is a few centuries later. It's no longer okay. And Mill was very right when he talked about, when he basically talked about, what should I say, when he talked about taxation. Okay, yesterday I spoke to you about inheritance, so I will not speak about it at length. His idea was, how can you consider someone else's wealth to be yours? If you didn't earn your own wealth, how can you consider that wealth to be yours? Now, you could take two examples in India. Okay, you have Mukesh Ambani, who inherited wealth. Built on it. Maybe he's unethical. I'm not getting into the ethics of that. Okay, I'm not getting into the ethics of that. Sorry. Maybe he's unethical, but he's built his wealth further. What he got was not what he has today. He has a lot more than he actually got from his father as inheritance. On the other side, you have two people that you can see. One is his own brother. Okay, Anil Ambani. Where is Anil Ambani? Totally at the mercy of his brother and at the mercy of Modi, because he supports crony capitalism. I hope you remember what crony capitalism is. The crony is a friend, C-R-O-N-Y. Crony is a friend. Crony capitalism is when people in power give certain favors to their friends and help them grow. So because of that, he is afloat today. Mukesh Ambani is also a crony capitalist. That's a different thing. Now, the other example that I want you to look at is the king of good times, who's fallen on extremely bad times. I'm referring to Vijay Mallya. Again, he didn't build his wealth. It was all his father, Vittal Mallya, who built his wealth. And our man, as long as he was running his booze business, he was all right. But when he got ambitious, when he went and set up an airline and made it a royal airline at economic prices, And when he bought a Formula One team, made it his own, and when he threw parties on the Indian Empress, which was a yacht, magnificent yacht of great design and wonderful proportions, he squandered the wealth. And today he's a defaulter who is fighting extradition from England, because if he comes here, people will latch onto him. All the creditors who had given him money, they'll latch onto him. So he's actually a pauper now. So you can have this thing works both ways. But Mill believed that why should somebody get a head start? One should not get a head start because it might build into something good, like it did with Mukesh Ambani. And Mill was also aware of the power of government. So I forgot to add that. So he also had views on representative, it's actually an essay, representative government. And he also talked about what he called social liberty. Very interesting concept. I don't know how I forgot to put that. Very, very interesting concept. We'll get to that anyway. So the utilitarian phase was when he wanted taxes. First, he wanted the government to take away everything. He wanted the government to take away everything and make people start again. Okay. That was what he was arguing at that time. But when he moved away from utilitarianism, it was due to the fact that he thought governments were getting too powerful. Okay. He thought that governments were getting to be too powerful, and therefore one should not have governments regulating the lives of people. So when he talked about that, he toned down his call for taxes, because he saw that, the government could get into a situation wherein through taxes it can impinge upon the freedoms of individuals. So he turned into a classical philosopher. When I say he turned into a classical liberal, sorry, I should have said classical liberal philosopher. When he turned into a classical liberal philosopher, he was no longer talking about taxation. He was no longer talking about those kind of things. And his silence on that was taken by many as his adoption of economic liberalism as well. Along with classical liberalism, he also took economic liberalism, which is nothing but, saying no taxes, free market that regulates itself. We talked about those things at great length when we were doing John Locke. So I will not talk about that. You know what is economic liberalism. So economic liberalism, people said he turned to economic liberalism. And some people say that at a later stage in his life, he also turned against economic liberalism because he started once again talking about society, and he started talking about classes. He started talking about classes in society. And while talking about classes in society, he did not talk about class in the classical liberal sense. He did not talk about it in the classical liberal sense. He talked about it in a slightly different sense. Just a second. Bottoms up. Right. So before this, we should also talk about another facet of his, which was his insistence on freedoms. Okay, he saw even society, okay, he saw even society as a possible hindrance into the freedom or liberty of the individual. That is the classical liberal phase, where he concentrated purely on the individual. He believed in the idea of unfettered liberty. Okay, unfettered liberty being given to individuals with no controls from the government and from the society. He emphasized freedom of speech. He emphasized freedom of speech. He said every individual should have totally unlimited freedom of speech so that the individual can express himself and herself. He believed in the equality of women. So here we just don't say himself, because when he wrote The Subjugation of Women, he was under the influence of Harriet Taylor, who unfortunately died. He had married her, and she was a women's rights activist. Mill, even after her death, remained true to her. He didn't marry again, and he pursued the ideas of Harriet Taylor. So, in fact, Mill is considered to be the first person to have talked about ending everything that had man in it. Like, for example, chairman, man. These days, feminists will say that if you say chairman, chairman, you say chairwoman. And I find it absolutely acceptable. If you say spokesman, say spokeswoman, no problem. But he argued that there shouldn't be this. We should use that neutral, which is person. So you talk about chairperson, spokesperson, and you don't refer to the gender of the person. That is what you find in The Subjugation of Women. Anyway, so we are talking about this phase where he argued for his individualism also included women. Locke's individualism did not include women. The whole tradition of classical liberalism did not include women and their rights and their whatever. But Mill included women. And in that sense, his classical liberalism is very different from other classical liberals. So he wanted the individual to be protected from societal, okay. We were told that it was to be pronounced societal, but now everybody says societal. So I guess we'll change with time. So there were societal pressures, and there should be no societal pressures exerted on the individual. So that was this extreme form of individualism, which is probably what made him a classical liberal, or what made some people call him a classical liberal, while others don't accept it because of his inclusion of women in it. Okay, the conservative attitudes were still prevalent. They were still prevalent. Now, you say he abandoned political economy when he turned against economic liberalism. That is true, because what he did was that at one point he believed that liberty should not be given to all. Liberty, he said at one point, should not be given to all. And he identified classes. He said those classes who were economically backward should not be given the same amount of freedom as what was given to the economically well off. His argument was that if you give too much freedom to people who are economically backward, then they tend to misuse it. By misuse, Mill meant beating of women, beating of children, their inability to take care of their wives and children. All these things, he said, were factors which basically were the reason why people from the backward classes economically, they don't have a caste system there. So he said that these people should not be given the same liberties because they'll misuse them. It's a fascinating thing if you think about it, that the impoverished somehow everywhere in the world have this pattern of behavior, which is hitting their women, hitting their children, not taking care of them, doing all these things. That somehow seems to be a phenomenon that is universal. So he said these people should not be given the same amount of freedom and liberty that you're giving to the upper classes. So immediately some people jumped on it and said that he's not a true individualist. They said he's not a true individualist. And that is because of the fact that there is a class-based component in his thought. This class-based component was that give total freedom to individuals, both men and women, in the upper classes, but in the lower and backward classes, all lower classes were not backward classes. Please remember that. Some people had decent education, they had some kind of a thing, but for various reasons remained lower classes. Mill didn't target them. He targeted those who were backward. And he also said children should not be given freedom to do whatever they want. This came from his upbringing, which was very, very orthodox. And like I said, he was homeschooled. So not only was it orthodox, it was also very authoritarian. So he believed that children should not be given freedoms, otherwise they'll get spoiled. That was his idea. Children should be encouraged to study, that, and their freedoms should be completely restricted. That is the thing that he talks about, even of the children of the upper classes, not just the backward classes, even the children of the upper classes, well-to-do people. So some people say, where is the individualist then? Which is, I think, a facetious argument. One cannot take it too seriously. One should not take it too seriously. He, at this point, was a champion of individual liberty, and there is no question about it. Okay. So there is no, you can dismiss this class thing, that he had a class-based thing rather than an individual-based thing. That you can dismiss without any doubt whatsoever. You can also dismiss the idea that he was a utilitarian. He was a utilitarian, yes, but he was a utilitarian for a very, very brief while in his life. And it was only in his early years where he was still forming. See, I told you the other day, physically when we age, we kind of, physical aging weakens us. It slows us down. It doesn't give us the same kind of, I mean, I am not what I am now, say 10 years ago. Even 10 years ago, I was better than this. But mental aging, though it's not a given and it's not universal, mental aging works very well with some people. Okay, and that is the reason why you will find that people change, they mature, they get better with their mental faculties as they aim. And there's no better example of that than Karl Marx, whose works are divided into two by the Hungarian Marxist Georgi Lukács. I'll talk about him when we do Marx, not now. He talks about the early Marx and the later Marx. And he says there is a difference in the writings of the early Marx and in the writings of the later Marx, they are not consistent with each other. That is his argument. It's a contentious argument, needless to say. Nobody wants to say that somebody changed his bent of mind. Anyway, but this also is something that happened in the case of John Stuart Mill. So he was utilitarian for a very few days. Then he turned into a complete classical liberal. And initially he was suspicious of the government, and he was suspicious of society. But over a period of time, what you find is that he turned against the government completely, and he invoked this particular idea called social liberty. Now, why did he have to do this? He did this because of the fact that he believed that the government, and he was a member of the parliament, by the way, he was elected as on the Liberal Party, or the Whig Party as it was called, sorry, WHIG, Whig, or the Liberal Party. He was an MP, and he was also a rector at the University of St. Andrews. And I had got admission there, but I couldn't go there. It's a great university. And he held the position of the rector there. And so he started believing that there should be a category called social liberty, which is where instead of individuals being fragmented, being on their own, being entirely on their own, they should form into social groups. They should form into social groups, and that these social groups should have people who have studied the Constitution, and these people who have studied the contribution were those who could protect the entire social collective or a group and protect their liberties. So it is for that reason he was called a constitutionalist. Somebody who knew the rules, laws, regulations, so that the government doesn't take advantage of people. Okay, and at this point, he also brought in what he called the harm principle. This is something that I should have written down. what is the harm principle? According to him, the harm principle is that which should be invoked if the liberty, let me type this out, which should be invoked if someone threatens to harm others and in some ways harm themselves. So he talked of self-regarding and other regarding actions. In the self-regarding actions, there was to be total liberty. But in others regarding actions, liberty had to be restricted by the invocation of the, I can't type that, by the harm principle. By invoking that harm principle, you can why? Liberty had to be restricted by the harm principle, by invoking the harm principle. Since it's gone down anyway, I might as well. Okay. So when he talked about representative, let me finish this, by the way. Yeah. So when he talks about the harm principle, he's actually talking about restrictions on individual freedoms as well. If your acts are likely to cause harm to others, then you don't have the liberty or the freedom to perform that act. You can't. You cannot perform that act. That's it. So here he said, self-regarding, you can have total freedom if you are doing something that concerns only you. Okay? Have the freedom, do it. But if you're doing something which involves others, then that will not be condoned. So the other regarding actions that we talk about need not be only about others. The other regarding actions can also be applied to the self. If I try to commit suicide, and if there is a family dependent on me, then suicide is another regarding action. My taking my life is not self-regarding. It is other regarding. It causes them harm because they lose the person who is taking care of them. So that is what is the harm principle and the self and other regarding actions. So he started slowly putting restrictions on what we call this idea of liberty, which began as unfettered liberty. Unfettered liberty. Slowly, over a period of time, as he considered his own thoughts, as he saw more of life, you will see that he moves into this dimension where he accepts social controls, though he doesn't accept governmental controls. He doesn't accept governmental controls, but he accepts social controls. Right? And that therefore that funny coinage, social liberty. And unlike Alexei de Tocqueville, who basically thought that if you give power, if you enfranchise everyone, what you will have is the reign of terror, which he saw in France and escaped from, didn't see it in America and loved it and wrote 2 volumes on, what should I say? He wrote 2 volumes on democracy in America, where he sang paeans of how wonderfully Americans were managing their democracy, where what he was seeing was an oligarchy. There's no democracy. There is still no democracy in America. He was only seeing an oligarchy. And obviously, being an aristocrat, it would have made great sense. Being an aristocrat is actually being an oligarch. So what he saw, he loved it. He loved the fact that people were kept out of voting. But Mill wanted enfranchisement of women. Now, if you want the enfranchisement of women, On what grounds will you deny votes to people who are men but who do not have money? Mill didn't put anything in the subjugation of women. He did not put any criteria that only rich women should vote. He talked about women in general because Harriet Taylor, with whom he was living, was fighting for the rights of all women, not for the rights of upper class women. So when you argue for the rights of women, you also have to argue for the rights of men to vote. Enfranchisement. Sorry about that. Enfranchisement is what you have to see. So he had to encourage universal adult franchise. But he said that will lead to the tyranny of the majority. The tyranny of the majority is interpreted in two ways. Now, one interpretation, when I say two ways, I'm not talking about Tocqueville here. I'm talking about Mill. One interpretation of the tyranny of the majority is that there is a great majority of people who do not have wealth, who are not rich. And if they start voting, then power will go into their hands. Power will go into the hands of the poor. And what will happen with that? There'll be degradation of culture in society, high culture that is, going to operas. So, or watching plays of Shakespeare, Chaucer. So all those things they won't stop, but they'll be affected. The power of control that the upper classes had, that would go. So that is one interpretation of the tyranny of the majority. The other interpretation of the tyranny of the majority is that the government itself will become tyrannical. If you enfranchise everyone, and if majorities become bigger in the houses of the parliament or the legislature actually, so governance as a process itself will become tyrannical. And that is where he became a constitutionalist again. He insisted, he said, the tyranny of the majority is inevitable. But you should have constitutional protection and social liberty. Right? So those are a protection against tyranny of the majority, constitutionalism and social liberty. So he being called a liberal socialist is nonsense. He's not a socialist in any sense of the term. He's not. He's not a socialist in any sense of the term. He is a liberal. In fact, when he started talking about other regarding, self-regarding actions and talking about the harm principle, and when he was talking about protection from the tyranny of the majority, he was going back to his utilitarian roots. So part of John Stuart Mill once again becomes a utilitarian. Towards the end of his life, he once again is not a complete utilitarian. It's not a complete utilitarian. But a part of him starts adopting principles from utilitarianism, but they are considerably different from those that were enunciated by Jeremy Bentham. There's no calculus here. In fact, I'll end with this point because Padma must be wondering how long is he going to go on. He said it's going to be a short class. Yeah, so sorry about that. I told you I get carried away when I teach Mill. And
Yes, sir, I understand.
Yeah, and this is somebody after exercising a lot of self-restraint. So just imagine what I would have been if I didn't exercise any restraint.
Right.
Yeah. So John Stuart Mill should be understood as a philosopher who has many different facets in him. He's not a unidimensional philosopher. He's not like John Locke, whose main thing is private property. He's not like Thomas Hobbes, protection of the, or rather the rational self-preservation of the individual. He's not like that. There are bits and pieces of everything in Mill. There are bits and pieces of everything in Mill. He even wrote a book called The Logic. What is it? I'm sorry. Actually, the book has a very long title, 4 lines it has, but it is simply called a case of logic or something like that.
A system of logic.
System of logic, yeah. But it has a very long title. That's not its actual title, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, system of logic. When he wrote this, he was under the influence of Auguste Comte. And many people say that it was his adoption of Comtean ideas that led to him giving up economic liberalism, though how that can be argued, I don't know. But he did have a pretty long friendship. They never met, They only wrote to each other. When we were young, we had this concept called pen friends, okay, which means people who lived in other cities and all. If you came across them on some forum somewhere and you got their address, you would write to them and they'll write back to you. So that is a thing called pen friends when we were young. Now nobody uses pens. Nobody writes letters. So there are no pen friends anymore. Okay. There's only social network, which is impersonal friendship. So Mill is not an easy philosopher to understand. There are number of elements in his philosophy. There are a number of elements in his philosophy that come from different sources. But if you actually look at it, nothing is really contradictory here. Nothing is contradictory. First, you talk of freedom for all, but when you restrain freedom, that is because there is a realization that I was not very correct when I said unrestrained freedom. Freedom of speech, he put a restraint on that also. He said violence is not just in actions. You can have violence in speech. And in speech, it also means writing, newspapers, right? So he said there should be restrictions on how you write. While he believed in the freedom of the press, he nevertheless said that the press has the responsibility to write properly without provoking people or without ruining people's reputations. It had to behave responsibly. Otherwise, he said, that can be banned. And he had this idea about India and China, and I end with this. He thought India and China were two glorious civilizations that unfortunately degenerated, okay? That unfortunately degenerated into barbarian culture. And here he was alluding to Mongols in China and Muslim rule in India. He said these led them to become barbarians. And he said this because he worked in the British East India Company for a brief while. He was enamored with the ancient past of both India and China, but he was, what came later, he said it was a gradual dissension into barbarism, which is an unfortunate thing to say, but that is Mill. Thank you. Padma, I've ended finally. Okay. Do you want a class tomorrow on Sunday? I want to finish 2 people off. If you want to keep your Sunday, it's fine. Monday, I don't have much to say about the feminists, so I'll finish at least 2 of them in one shot. It's up to you. I think
We'll have it, sir, in the morning.
We'll have it
Same
in
time for 1 hour.
Yeah, today was 2 hours.
Yeah.
Not 2 hours, a little over. Yeah, whatever.
Yes.
Maybe 2 hours.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but tomorrow I'll keep it brief because I'm not a feminist scholar. I mean, seriously, I'm not a scholar of feminism.
Okay.
So what I'll be saying will be homilies and platitudes. Right?
Sir, I have a doubt.
Yeah.
The notes, whatever running notes you're making, whatever you're typing here, will that be enough for us to?
Absolutely. I'm typing them so that you can go back and check them.
Yeah.
That's the reason why I'm typing them.
Yes.
You
So this
don't,
would be enough for the exam, from the exam
absolutely,
point.
more than enough from the exam point of view.
Okay.
More than enough. I'm typing them out because you
Right.
can go back to them. That's the reason why.
But we need to make a structure out of it for the answers, right? If we write about a thinker, first write about his about himself in the introduction, then body.
I don't believe in that. If you write, if somebody asks you a question, was John Stuart Mill a classical liberal philosopher? I would say go to the point and answer to the point. You don't need to put he was born, he died, his parents, his children. All that details are not necessary. In my scheme of things, the way I understand things, please write to the point. You don't have to write reams of papers and waste them. Just write to the point. Is he a classical liberal or a utilitarian? You can say he's a bit of both with proof. That's it.
Right.
You don't need to write anything else about it.
Okay. So one more thing, now the time is just for 2 hours, right? The exam.
I think so.
Then what is the change in the pattern? Is there any?
Just cutting down of questions. That was what was done for the 4th semester people. It was
cutting down in the sense?
Previously, they had to write 5 answers. Now
5 long answers out of 10.
Yes, now they have to write 3 out of 6. They had to write 3 out of 6, I think. And there were 5 short answers, which became 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the choice also would come down, no, sir, then?
It's anyway internal choice. Or did they make it open choice? I don't know. I have no idea.
So can we know about this thing, sir?
Just ask, call Anita.
Okay.
Anita is the head of the department. Anita or Shekhar. They are the heads of the department, or head department and chairman board of studies. No, truly, that's the truth.
And then the distribution of questions according to unit wise. What I've seen in the previous year paper is from each unit 2 questions, and that's how 10 questions, and we have to write 5 from there.
Yes, that is how it is supposed to be. 2 questions.
But now if it is,
I don't know. I actually didn't see the 5th semester question papers, 4th semester question papers. I'm sorry. So I really don't have an idea what they did. Did they give a complete open choice?
No, sir, it's internal choice only.
Hmm?
It's internal choice only. The first section where we have to write all 5 on 5. short answers are there in section A. And in section B, there is internal choice, 10 questions. We need to attempt 5.
Yeah,
Each
but I
carries
don't
12
know.
marks.
There was some talk about giving 6 questions and asking you to write 4. And there was some talk about giving 10 questions and asking you to write any 5.
Okay.
So I don't know ultimately in what form that thing came.
Okay.
Because I don't correct papers. So
Okay, sir. I'll talk to Anita ma'am once.
yeah, just talk to her.
Yes.
Okay. Right.
Okay, sir. Then.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Bye,
you.
sir. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye. So tomorrow
Thank
at
you, sir.
11. Tomorrow at
Okay.
11. We'll
Yes.
Okay,
finish
sir.
off Kate Millett and
Nancy,
Simone de
please.
Beauvoir.
Okay.
Okay. Right.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.